I am Nina Rodin. I have a Danish passport, and at the moment I live in a small village in the French-speaking part of Switzerland. I was 17 years old when I started my first degree in theoretical physics and wrote a small dissertation in astrophysics. I was 21 when I started my PhD at Oxford in neuroscience with a thesis in neurophysiology. And in between those two, I actually did short art courses, both in Florence and in Denmark. Still, I went on to work as a scientific researcher, doing a postdoc at the Brain Research Institute in Zurich. And it was only when I was 30 years old that I actually first set foot in the studios of a large London art school. My first encounter with forestry tape was in the middle of the Amazon many years ago, where we'd been walking through this deep, continuous, relentless layers of green on green on green and dripping with moisture, but green. And then in the middle of the path is hanging this bright, fluorescent pink ribbon. Later, I found out that this tape, which in the Amazon was actually being used for scientific purposes. So I'm like, ooh, lovely little scientific tool there that I can use in my work. In researching how I could lay my hands on some, I found that it's actually more used for logging purposes, for marking trees for felling. The geisha is often misunderstood in a similar way to contemporary artists. Contemporary artists are quite often co-opted by the art market, which is a very, very different world from that of the studio. And there's a sort of feeling that we have to make the work to please, the problem of selling out. The geishas are nowadays, especially, or the image we have of them is that similar pressure of selling her body, whereas in fact, the only thing she sold was her art, her skills, her aesthetic, very much like a contemporary artist. And the real power that she had, and I think that the contemporary artist has as well, is the soft power of creating encounters, of starting conversations, of starting people thinking about the world in which they live. After the party, the installation is like walking through a beautiful, playful forest, a very welcoming one. You can't help but touch these silky ribbons. Children end up playing with them, and we showed it with music, party music playing in the background. It's a far more welcoming environment than a real forest, so we create these worlds that suit us out of plastic and other industrial materials. In which we feel at ease and comfortable and safe, but in actual fact, we are slowly killing ourselves through what we're doing to the environment. The clothes project comes from my fascination with the complexity of the human mind and the number of micro decisions that we take in our day-to-day lives. There are so many possibilities actually every day as to what you put on and in which order. Even deciding that you're going to wear the same thing for days on end is a conscious decision, and it's one that we all have in common. And that's how I got curious about how many of these decisions I make in a year. So for the clothes project, I recorded every change of clothes that I make, whether it was just changing socks, putting on a pair of earrings, or putting on a coat to go out, one photo for each change of clothes. Altogether, this process yielded 11,985 photos, which are shown in a number of ways, both as wallpaper, but most importantly, as a 30-minute video loop with 8 photos per second. Books were for a long time were really important to me as because I felt they gave me the ability to show a very large number of images in a tightly curated format. A very important book is the one that's called Déjà Vu, because it holds 250 macro photographs shown in a format of microscope slides. Each of these photographs is a detail of a painting, whether deliberate from a finished piece of work or accidental, so perhaps from a palette or the floor of a studio. The book has become a work of reference in my studio. It's like my encyclopedia of painting. It holds one of each of kind of the main kinds of painterly marks that you can make. Open System is made from the photos in the book Déjà Vu, and represents the kind of the world of painting, all these myriad possibilities, all the different ways in which you can put one color next to another, is what really attracts me to painting, which means that I can't leave it alone. And it gives me great pleasure to take each of these and print them onto a precious piece of paper and fold them up and look with them and sit with them and construct this system to which I can always add more, which is why it's called Open System. At the same time, there's a sense that it's constructed so it could be a perfect sphere, but it actually starts to collapse on itself. The weight of it turns it into something that's a little sadder, a little more threatening, but still, to me, incredibly beautiful. I'm very aware as a contemporary painter of the weight of the history of painting that has come before me. When you go to a big London art school, the painting department is often considered to be the stuffy one. From that comes the title of the work, Stuffed, where I've got a taxidermy globe filled with paint over my head. And it's that weight and situation, the slightly ridiculous, but lush and beautiful status of being a painter. Self-portrait with 2 failed projects is exactly what it says on the tin. I've wrapped myself into a project that failed, in large part with the help of my dog that chewed on both of them. When I came up to the studio and saw this work that had been destroyed, as a coping mechanism, I just kind of put it over my head and wrapped myself in the other one and had a little sort of drama queen moment. But then, of course, because I was doing the clothes project, I'd put on new pieces of clothing, suddenly counts as clothing. So I ran down to the setup, took the pictures with those 2 items on. Later, I decided to paint these laboriously with a tiny brush with a kind of tongue-in-cheek nod at the very formal self-portrait of the young artist, which is typically a young man intently staring himself in the mirror, holding a brush in front of his easel. And, you know, it's almost like a rite of passage to make one of these self-portraits of the artist. Mine is not so interested in my face, but more in failure. For me, failure is a very integral part of being an artist. When I was a scientist, I would go to the lab, repeat and experiment a certain number of times till it was statistically clear that I had a result ready to publish. As an artist, I don't often have that certitude unless I construct a pseudoscientific setup to make art. The painting is something where the ground is shifting under me a lot more. In actual fact, I have this visceral, deep, close love for painting. And this is reflected in the world Wild Caviar. Wild Caviar has a much, much longer title. It's basically is a performance done in the privacy of my own studio with the help of a photographer holding the video camera, where I smear myself in paint, cover different body parts, scrape the paint off, drip it, splash it, and just really indulge in the unctuous materiality of the stuff. The video, though, is shown through a peephole, and you only see very little of my body at a time to emphasize this intimate relationship that I have towards paint. From the same photos that constitute the book Déjà Vu and that I use in open systems, I printed 1,000 little squares of Japanese washi paper, which is traditionally used for origami. And each of these precious photos of painterly marks is folded up into a butterfly and pinned into these massive arrays. The butterflies are pinned in phyllotaxic Fibonacci spirals. These are a very particular circular arrangement that have 2 characteristics. The first one is that all the butterflies are equidistant from one another, so it's a sort of democratic arrangement of painterly marks. No one painterly mark to me is more precious or less interesting than the next. And then you can always add one. So I stopped at 1,000, which is this nice round number for a mathematician, but in actual fact, if there was 1003 or 1017, it would still be a perfectly round arrangement. After completing this array of 1,000 painterly marks pinned with entomological pins into this huge box frame, I had the need again to get out of the painting and then do something really cold and scientific, just white butterflies numbered one by one in pencil by hand, just sitting there and counting from 1 to 1,000 and just really celebrating the mathematics behind them. I think having the two side by side really brings out the contrast between the mad, crazy, beautiful world of painting and settled the certitudes that science affords. So yeah, that's me, a scientist turned artist, still living between both worlds, really not letting go of all of them.